All right. The ops guy, Nick Heyman. This is the Something Ventured podcast. I'm Kent Lindstrom. My guest is Nick Heyman. Nick Heyman was, among other things, the sixth. What were you, like the fifth or the sixth person at Facebook?
I think it depends on how you count, but
well, I go.
You could count me
one, then two, then there's a three after that.
You could count me either 8 or I think 8 or 9.
Holy crap!
Yeah,
that's incredible. Those
were crazy times.
It sounds like it. Of course, Nick has done many other things, but that's a fairly notable one. Well, let's talk about that for a second. So, the fifth or sixth person. So, basically, everybody on the planet now wants to be that person, seventh or eighth. Did your 2014 self go back in time and say, "Hey, you should go work at Facebook"? Or how did you figure out how to go to Facebook at the time? You were at Friendster. Full disclosure, we worked together at Friendster.
We did.
And then Nick left and went to Facebook, which was a genius decision. But how, at the time, it doesn't seem like it was an obvious choice. Now it's of course.
Well, it it wouldn't have been possible without Friendster.
Right.
What ended up happening, the history of it was I was at Friendster, and I was there pretty early when we were in our tiny office shared with LinkedIn back on Shoreline.
That's right. Yep.
And Friendster was crazy, and the amount of stuff I learned from working at Friendster, just in terms of social networking, and that it was this thing.
Right.
It just that was eye opening to begin with.
And it's funny at the time that it was a thing, but it wasn't quite so clear as now. I remember at Friendster, people were like, "Oh, it's a fad." And then there was are people really going to want to put their profiles online? That kind of, and now, of course, it's hey, I've had 40,000 followers.
We were on fire at Friendster. I mean, that was a fire that we just couldn't get under control.
Right.
And even when the fad, I mean, that's when MySpace was taking off.
Yeah.
And it was through Friendster that I learned about Facebook, because we almost bought them.
Right.
Which I had this super weird experience. I think maybe it was February of 2004, I want to say.
Right.
Where I saw Mark and Dustin in the lobby of our Mountain View office at Friendster, and I was like, "Are you in the right place?" I was friendly, but I was like, "Who are these people?" And then I think Scott Sassa at the time was like, "Oh yeah, my daughter's really into this," and
wow,
he knew something about them,
right?
And so in the back of my mind, I was like, "Oh, college based, tagged, or because there were a couple other social networking companies that were around at the time."
So it's Mark Zuckerberg and Dustin Moskovitz. Is that who it was? So Dustin was still around.
Yeah. I got interviewed by Sean Parker, Dustin, and Mark. It was interview by committee. And
so why did you? I mean, of all the people was it just that you'd been at Friendster, so you knew?
No. So what happened was Joyce Park, who we had worked together with at Friendster. She knew Matt Kohler, and Friendster and Facebook just so happened to need ops help. They had one guy there at the time, this great guy who's now a professor or visiting professor down at UCSD.
Oh wow!
And they just had one person, and Dustin had been doing a lot of that work, and this guy Tanera had been doing a lot of the work. But Joyce knew Matt Kohler, who was
their first business guy.
Their first business guy.
Who came from LinkedIn.
He came from LinkedIn, and he was doing everything.
Right.
So Joyce knew Matt, and Joyce recommended me to Matt, and so Matt introduced me to Facebook. And when I walked into the office, I just knew that this is a place I wanted to work
Why?
at.
What was it like? I know someone who interviewed there and they didn't like it. They were older and they had kids, and he said something like, he ended up going to Bebo, so he did fine, but he said something like, it was a late night thing, and he was newly married with kids, and it just wasn't for him. What did you see that was just okay, got to do this?
Well, the energy walking into that 471 Palo Alto office, where it was something was going on, and they were a lot younger than me, so I didn't really have my finger on what that was. But after having been at Friendster, where it
was a little lethargic.
Well, it was
after Jonathan left. To be fair,
but Friendster was being walked into the firing squad every day. When I left, I was dreading coming to work every day.
Yeah, well, that's no way to live.
It's no way to live, but the space itself, the fundamental promise or premise of social networking, was really exciting.
Yeah.
and it's something that I wanted to do. And I had a little intermission where I worked at the startup in between called Feedster, which didn't really grow. And so that was kind of like low energy as well. And then just walked in this room, and I felt the energy.
Really?
Yeah.
So what was it like? I mean, people were, I don't know, showing up like it. How does it? Like,
well, it started off like everything was really late. So I walked into the office, and there's this guy sitting at the reception desk who was their first, I don't even know, like first product guy almost. Oh, yeah. Like he would do everything product wise.
Right.
And I'm like, I'm here for an interview, and they're like, yeah, you're here at 10:30. You're a little early.
Right.
And I was like, okay, well, when do people come in? He's like, maybe 11:30.
Wow.
Noon. And I was like, okay, well, I'll just hang out. And it just felt, you had this amazing David Cho artwork on the wall, and you just felt this youthful energy where it's like.
And David Cho's the dude who famously did some art for stock options.
Yeah, that's right. So the paint was still drying basically when I walked in for my interview. So
right, that is insane.
Yeah.
So was there a point at Facebook where, because at the time there were multiple social, there still are, but there was there was a Friendster, there was a MySpace, there was a Bebo. Was there a time when everybody kind of went, oh, this is going to work? Like, this one's going to be the one. Like, it's not going to be Friendster or MySpace, and there's not going to be 4 of them. It's us.
That's tough to say. Like, we knew MySpace. we knew MySpace was definitely competition.
Yeah.
But from a design perspective or from a usability perspective, we knew that just couldn't work.
Wow. Yeah.
And we knew that the technical platform that they were built on just had these enormous challenges that was going to make it really tough for them to just continue to make that stuff work.
Was it? I mean, so Facebook made the bet at the time. There was the media bet, which was people want to put HTML and all kinds of graphics all over their site. Then there was the sort of no, real personalities, real people. It's not about the site. It's about you and the photos. Matt Kohler actually said that he thought social networks emerged right when digital photography became widespread.
Well, that was Chris Lunt when I.
That's fine.
I just need to clear my throat.
Yeah,
when I interviewed at Friendster back in the long ago days of September 2003, Chris Lunt, one of the engineers there, I was like, so explain to me about social networking. Like, I don't see it. And he's like, well, social networking takes advantage of this disruptive digital photography.
Yeah.
And that totally made sense to me.
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
That's right. Like, you've got to put these photos somewhere, and you've got to show them, and you want to show this stuff off. Like, how do you do it? How do you sort of contextualize that and give that relevance?
Yeah, it's a crazy story. Full disclosure, I work with Jonathan Abrams now, and he founded Friendster. We're going to do a podcast on sort of what happened there, but it's just crazy that he in his, basically in his bedroom, like typing code, did this thing that resonated with so many people. I mean, I'm looking forward to, once I get good at podcasting, having him on. That'll be like the most interesting podcast ever.
Jonathan Abrams, the godfather of social network.
Oh, yeah, absolutely is. So was there a time? Okay, so everybody at Facebook, there's got to be a point where you're like, for not you specifically, but anybody in general who's one of the first 10 people must have said, okay, these stock options that I have, like, they're not the ones that turn out to be worth $72,000. Like, my life is different. Like, is there a point where that happens to people where they're like, oh shit, like I'm this other guy now.
Maybe, you can never say that with certainty, but there were a couple of things where I knew that the company was going to do really well.
Yeah.
Did it do even more amazing things beyond my expectations? Yes. But I think when we started launching schools,
right,
and like large schools like University of Texas or FSU, like these 50,000 plus schools, and we'd see 80% adoption within a week. Yeah, like we were onto something,
right? And
the engagement statistics for Facebook, which were insane, was something like I think it was literally like a half an hour per day with 80% of the user base.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane.
That's insane.
Right.
And that was like the average.
Yeah.
So you slice that data a little bit more, and people are spending like an hour, 2 hours on the site a day.
Holy crap.
This is like before mobile phones.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, it's kind of funny. I remember at the time it was, people were speculating. They were like, sites like Friendster or Facebook, these things could be worth as much as like $1 billion.
$1 billion.
And that was like people like, dude, sober up.
Yeah.
Like, okay, several hundred million interesting asset. And now we're looking at things that are literally $100 billion things.
Yeah.
So is there a point where people go, like on the money side, where people go crazy, like the Ferraris show up in the parking lot, or like like what happens? Like, you've seen like the Eddie Murphy thing on Saturday Night Live where he becomes a white guy for a while. They're like, oh no, it's not, everything's free. Like, what happens? Like, do you get something
around.
like?
No, I wasn't around when the IPO hit or when the lockup expired.
Right.
So I don't know. I think my experience with people who I worked with at the time is everybody is just extremely humble and grateful about it. Like,
yeah.
Holy shit! I didn't expect this to happen. Or
that is such a crappy story for radio. Like, I wanted to hear there's a jet or something, right? Or somebody rented a helicopter.
I think that people may do that.
Yeah.
I don't get invited on those helicopter jet rides, but people certainly may do those things.
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody is like, man, I can't wait to hop on a plane and pop the champagne.
I don't know what happens. I just imagine you go to like Morgan Stanley or whoever manages your money, and they go, oh, like for you, there's a secret freeway like underground, or there's like a whole another airport you don't know about. Or
don't I wish
something like that?
I wish that were the case. I got some free cookies over at Goldman Sachs once.
Oh shit, free cookies at Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, they were nice cookies too. Specialties.
It's funny. One of the topics I want to cover as I do these podcasts is sort of wealth and wealth disparity in Silicon Valley. It feels like, aside from what people think about the Google buses, it feels like people keep it on the pretty down low when they get wealthy, like most people. I was talking to Stan Chudnovsky, who now runs growth at PayPal. He said something when like Michael Birch sold Bebo, and it's public knowledge. He made like $600 million or something like that, and does charity water and a bunch of great stuff. But he was like, what you've got to realize is when Tom Cruise does a movie, he gets like $20 million. Mm-hmm. Like Michael Birch or people like that make $20 million like every quarter.
Yeah.
Like it's just this other crazy level of sort of influence and wealth. But anyway, one of the things in this podcast, we're here in San Francisco, and the idea is that a little bit I want to bring people around the world into what goes on in San Francisco. So there's been this kind of crazy housing thing going on here, which is, so San Francisco's bounded on three sides by water. It's and I think it's like 4% of the population is tech. Mm-hmm. Is actually tech employees. And so what happens is a lot of these people work down in the valley and they take buses to get there.
Yeah.
Because these companies figured out that having 10 people or 50 people drive a car, put them all on a bus, they're all going to the same place.
Give them Wi-Fi and let them work on the bus, which a lot of them do.
Yeah, exactly. And so they're taking a bus to work. By the way, I did a Crystal Knocked episode. It's pretty heavy.
Oh, really?
Much heavier episode.
Oh, man.
I think we treated the topic well, but so housing prices in San Francisco are very high. Rent prices are very high. But it's kind of ridiculous, right? The buses, these buses get protested.
Yep.
And as is often the case, Jon Stewart put it best when he said, why would a group of people protest another group of people like taking the bus to work?
Yeah.
It's just crazy. But there was recently a TechCrunch article that was actually pretty
great article.
Thoughtful.
Finally it talked about some of the structural problems in the entire region and San Francisco, which have sort of led to this housing crisis.
Yeah. Well, and my sense is, so the gist of the article was, it's supply and demand, stupid.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And I actually find with a lot of intellectual arguments, whenever you don't have a basic understanding of economics, that's when the arguments get fairly unthoughtful. Right. It's like
Well, I think too, when you put, economics on one side and then evicted grandmothers on the other side, one of them is a very emotional appeal, one of them is very dry and scientific.
Well, and I think, economics matter, right? Like this is like one of the most, when you talk to people about like, well, why wouldn't you feed your kids like organic food from Whole Foods or whatever? It's like, well, some people actually can't afford that.
Yeah,
like,
because it costs $5 for
And I think where Silicon Valley is sort of the least sometimes thoughtful is, you see, I was talking to somebody about a Mac. They have a Mac instead of a PC, and they're like, why wouldn't anybody buy a Mac? It's better. It's like,
because it's grand more. Yeah,
because the average person in this world makes $1 a day, so it makes a difference.
It totally makes a difference.
But this article said, look, San Francisco, basically, you sort of have these two liberal, well-meaning things that happen that in aggregate screw up the housing. They restrict the supply. So we don't want to have growth. We want to keep open spaces. There's something called the Marin Headlands, which is this beautiful place. We don't want to build high rises on the Marin Headlands. Sure. Prices would drop really quickly. That's what Hong Kong does.
Yep.
But we don't do it. So basically, we just restrict the crap out of the supply of housing in San Francisco. And then when the economy does well, the prices just do what the prices do. They go up.
Well, we've been here before. I guess one of the great things which I really loved about the TechCrunch article was the basic research she did, which was there was a housing crisis in the 80s. There's a housing crisis in the 90s.
Yeah.
Now there's a housing crisis in the 2000s. Like it's a rinse and sort of repeat.
Yeah.
And you have to look at some of the structural problems with San Francisco, which is this very restricted supply.
Yeah.
But you've also got this sort of Byzantine anti-growth sort of laws, which from the engineering side of me just absolutely make no sense.
Yeah.
But
well, I mean, they're there. I mean, the idea is, well, I guess there's some of this protecting open space. Like there's some of that concept. The height restrictions. I mean, that's the toughest one to really justify.
Right.
I mean,
to me, I don't understand that. And I'm.
Well, I do. I have a house.
Well,
it's like I don't want somebody blocking my view, basically, right? Like,
sure, but I think there's an argument to be made, which this is where I to me it structurally breaks down, which is that on certain corridors, like especially on BART or on along BART corridors, where you've got these sort of already mostly urbanized areas, like you take Mission Street or South Market, or you push back on the other side of Cesar Chavez along Mission Street where BART goes. You've got the opportunity to build some taller buildings to alleviate that housing demand. And I think you could really sort of really help out here by saying like, okay, well, I think the limit's like 8 stories or something like that right now. Right. I think you go
3 in the Mission.
Yeah, something crazy. I think you say, build a 20-story building and make the first 4 floors affordable housing.
Well, that's how HUD housing works, actually. Like generally.
Exactly. I mean, but talk about structural problems, right? The HUD financing slashed in the 80s, right?
Right.
It's part of the structural problem for San Francisco housing. Yeah. Combine that with Prop 13 and
exactly Prop 13, which keeps property taxes low.
Keeps property taxes low, and there was one other law which is like really sort of unconscionable about that, and then
we have rent control too, which is a really weird. Like it's if you think it.
I really struggle with rent control.
Well, I mean, most economists say if you get rid of rent control, the prices just all move to the middle. Like the people who are paying $300 to live in Noe Valley move to Bayview and pay $400, and the people who are paying $3,000, that comes down to $2,500. But in the United States, it's very weird to have any property that you own have the price dictate. If you think of any other asset, like if people say,
I kind of don't understand how rent control stands up to a constitutional challenge.
But I don't get, if someone said to you, look, your car, you can't sell it for more than $100 because people need transportation. Yeah. You'd be like, what? Fuck you. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah,
right?
I struggle with it. Yeah. I mean, I understand, I understand the need for housing. Yeah. Absolutely. And to me, when San Francisco spends on the order of $800 million for public housing assistance, I think you could maybe take some of that money and do rent subsidies so that effectively you could pay market rate to the landlord so that landlords are incentivized to maintain their properties and to give to be responsive to tenants' needs. Yeah. And you can then structure rent in such a way that you can incentivize families or lower income seniors or wherever that need is. Yeah. But I mean, the rent control without means testing, which, for some reason that's supposedly thought of as a real sort of horrible
Well, you know
thing.
what this is? I think, frankly, San Francisco's like 75% renters.
It is.
It's people just voting shit for themselves.
I know.
It's like, hey, I just vote we don't pay a lot. Like, it's really...
Yeah, you're never going to change that.
Right. Or unless you stuff enough people into the condos who are, become homeowners.
Yeah, but, San Francisco doesn't incentivize that. So, I don't... Again, with that $800 million... with that $800 million housing, I don't see why you incentivize ownership, because then you do get the effect of rising tide lifting all boats.
Well, and weird things are happening. Like there's this whole sort of caricature, right, where it's like, okay, these tech people are pushing other people out, and like, well, which people are better than the other people? It's all people.
Yeah.
Like the new people are coming in. The idea that tech people, Google said stuff like these people pay taxes and they donate to charity and stuff, which is great, but screw that. Like a person working in tech doesn't have to defend that they're a good person.
Well, what I don't understand is that the attitude that I see from the people who are sort of against the tech people, it's a pretty nativist attitude.
If you did that to any other group of people, it's immigrant go home.
Yeah, immigrant go home.
That is what it is.
I don't understand that. So, I mean, where's our proposition to create the coolness committee, or can you stay in San Francisco? That's where it goes to, because what is the test?
It gets very distasteful. I mean, there are people taking a bus to work. They're not flying an airplane to vacation, right? They're taking a bus to work. I have friends who don't work in tech. They're artists and that kind of thing. They way overestimate what the people. They imagine the people on the bus are all making $4 million a year. Mm-hmm. They're not. I mean, there's probably one guy who is, but most of them are.
He's the guy driving the bus. No, I'm just kidding.
He could be, by the way.
I mean,
I want to interview that guy.
Yeah,
like what goes on.
I'd be very curious. I mean, what I find, one of the things I have a question about, which I don't know the answer to, and would be great to sort of know the answer to, which is for these technology companies, which provide a lot of perks to their employees. There are a lot of sort of service support personnel.
Yeah,
and are those people making a living wage? Like, is that support service? Because
totally,
I do question the sort of TaskRabbitization of a workforce.
Yeah, that's right.
To a certain degree, but I would be optimistic in thinking that whatever companies that these tech companies are employing to help with these services, they're paying a good wage. And I know, at least for the cooks, they always get paid well for places which have food services.
It's interesting. Mark Benioff, the Salesforce guy, said something. Salesforce's officer here in San Francisco, he does not do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And the reason he gives is that he wants people to go out and spend money on Market Street.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure what difference it makes. You're either employing somebody in a warehouse who's bringing you.
I don't know his comments about his comments yesterday. I'm not sure I fundamentally agree. I don't think.
Wait, what did you say yesterday? What did I miss?
I think he called out Mark Zuckerberg.
Oh man,
his $1 billion donation. He called it out and said he wasn't doing enough. And
dude, the guy's like, how old is he? 30? Like, give Mark a couple more years.
That's kind of how. Well, I think it's tough to sort of tell people what to do. And one of the things which I'm not sure many people understand is most of these people who work in these technology firms, startups, or even more mature, they're working a lot. So the amount of bandwidth that they have to sort of think about these other things, if I'm in a management position and somebody's like, oh, I kind of want to volunteer for a day, I'm kind of like,
this is, a kind of dirty secret of Silicon Valley. The average tech worker actually does not. It's changed a little bit, but generally, they're getting people look at a lottery and they think they're going to win. People way overestimate their chances of winning a lottery. People are getting paid less than they would be if they went to McKinsey or a law firm or were an investment banker, on the hope that something happens like what happened to you. And frankly, it doesn't happen. It's 95% of the time.
I would say even 99% of the time.
Exactly.
It's the exception rather than the rule.
And so Silicon Valley is really, in some sense, structured around underpaying, believe it or not, developers. Any of these developers could go work at Goldman Sachs and get paid $350,000,
$400,000. Yeah.
And they're not going to make that in stock options.
No.
99% of the time, but everyone's like, oh, I'm the next Mark Zuckerberg, or I'm the next guy who shows up and paints a frickin' picture for Mark Zuckerberg.
Optimism is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think the thing is, you know, you get a higher sort of baseline salary. So if you look at sort of the engineering salary, I think you're in that, let's say, $130 to $170 range for a coder or an engineer.
Yeah. Which is an enormous amount of money.
Which is an enormous amount of money.
Yeah.
But you're also working 50 to 60 hours a week.
Yeah.
And that's maybe even in the office.
Right.
So the connected technology, you're working more. And like, even if you don't think you're working, sometimes you kind of are. You're answering that email at midnight. You know, there's a lot of you know, Google and Facebook and Twitter, all these companies do a really good job of really blending that work-life distinction. Yeah. And that's intentional.
And I think we're just getting a lot of focus on it. Famously, a lot of the New York press has recently been writing about San Francisco.
What's up with that?
I think it's funny. I met with a reporter from the New York Magazine, that guy who wrote the article. And boy, he was quick with the stat of like, there's 5 billionaires in San Francisco and there's like 57 of them.
Is it jealousy?
I think it's like, you know, there's people in New York who are enormously wealthy. Yeah. They make $10 million a year. Yeah. And then, you know, when it got to the point that people were making $100 million, they were like, oh, that's interesting. I think when people like the WhatsApp guy make $8 billion, they go, what?
3 years of work, yeah.
What am I missing? Like, that doesn't happen to me. Yeah. And I think they get a little stuck because you can work your way to be an investment banker. You can do it. You can't will your way to be WhatsApp or Mark Zuckerberg. There's an enormous amount of luck. You can't really be the guy who wants the money in the first place because you got to do that. You know,
you do it out of love. I mean,
that's exactly right.
You get the 10-year-old people who are working on their computers, like hacking away at that stuff. Yeah. That's what turns into these programmers. Not,
that's totally right. Not people who are like, I'm going to Wharton and I'm going to
No. Those are people who
it just doesn't work.
Well, those are people who join, you know, employee 250, employee 300,
right.
You know, and
that's right. Which is not a bad model.
Which is not a bad model. I mean, you work for a successful company, you will get an upside of that. Yeah. You're talking, you know, a few $1 million, you know, if you pick well. And
so Mark and we can wrap this up with this question or talk about this a little bit. But so Mark Zuckerberg obviously was not the cash out and leave guy. I mean, he structured the board, and that's a whole nother episode we talk about. He structured the board of Facebook in a way that he retains control. Right. I would argue to the great benefit of everybody.
Well, I mean, he saw what happened to Jonathan at Friendster. Yeah, right. That was an instructive life lesson for him.
Yeah. And I mean, the short thing is that Friendster was doing great, frankly, while Jonathan was there, kicking ass. He got pushed out for whatever reason, and the decline and his departure were highly correlated.
There were two sort of very instructive companies. One was Google, where the founders did retain control. Yeah. And refused to sort of be swayed by the glamour of the board. Yeah. And then there was Friendster and Sean Parker, who knew Jonathan. Yeah. And Sean, who had been forced out of his own companies. You know, that was a lesson. That was one of the lessons that Mark knew very early on. Right. And he was never wowed by the razzle dazzle. Right. And maybe Peter Thiel, I didn't know that relationship, but maybe that also helped there too.
So how's he doing now? I mean, he seems like I know Sheryl's running a lot. Sheryl Sandberg's running a lot of it, but he seems like he's doing it. So he's just acquired WhatsApp. Yep. Which seems to me like it makes a ton of sense. Yeah. It's got 450 million people using that thing.
Yeah, that's crazy, isn't it?
And I had somebody who's like, how can 50 people be worth that? I'm like, think about like, I don't know, How I Met Your Mother TV show just finished. Yeah. And it like had 12 million people watch the final episode or something like that. Like 12 million people. And they're like, big 450 million people.
In emerging economies, right? Yeah. So
including Europe.
Well, but so Europe as a first world economy, and then you have all of these emerging economies which are using it. Yeah. So that if that's not a long bet, or if that's not a 5-year bet, yeah. I mean, just look at what happened with Instagram, bigger than Twitter. Right. You know, who right. Who would have thought? I mean, everybody looked at that deal and was like, "What are you thinking?"
Right. Well, and I think I imagine Mark also thinks of it from the other side of the fence, which is okay. He bought WhatsApp for like 10% of Facebook's value. Yeah. but it's half as big as Facebook or a third as big. So he probably spent about 6 minutes making that decision before he called up Jan or whatever his name is.
I'm sure he didn't spend. I'm sure once it clicked for him,
right?
It was the express train. The express train left the station.
Yeah. What? I mean, I think Facebook's just doing a great job there.
I do
Who
too.
knows what's going to happen with Facebook itself? It's getting really weird, by the way, with all this Upworthy stuff. Like my Facebook feed doesn't have pictures of humans I know anymore. It's all
really,
yeah, because so many people are sharing this like optimized, 7 things you're never going to believe, and
I get some of that.
6.
I get a lot. I don't know how many friends do you have?
I don't know, lots, like 1,000. I think my friends. I got to get them. They got to stop clicking on that crap.
Yeah, I think I've got about 800, but a lot of people criticize the sort of edge rank algorithm.
Yeah,
it's worked great for me.
What's an edge rank algorithm?
That's what they use to place posts in your feed.
Oh,
so
I don't know, for something. And there's this one woman who I must have stalked at some point. Like I don't think I did, but every time she does something, I get like notified.
Yeah,
like it's like the stalker setting for her. I didn't even know.
Maybe that's a setting you have to set. No,
it must be. It's very weird. But
no, it's done. Facebook, from what I've observed, has done a very good job of sort of surfacing relevant content.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed, just in general, is that you don't hear a lot of people saying like, "Oh, Facebook works so great."
Yeah.
I just don't think they bother to say it. But I think
right.
if you look at their metrics, you're not going to see an enormous drop off.
Yeah, I think you're supposed to say you're too cool for Facebook.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, I'm a busy, important person.
Yeah.
No way. Like people are on every day. Like, oh, what's up with that guy? It's always interesting.
What I love is people are like, yeah, I'm too cool for Facebook. It's all about Instagram. I'm like, there's no difference.
Yeah,
like
it's the same guy.
It's the same.
I mean, and that set of assets is just amazing. With WhatsApp is incredible.
WhatsApp.
It sounds like the WhatsApp
I'm
is a response
super excited
to,
about Oculus Rift, which is
So I'll ask you about that. But what is WhatsApp's a response to? Are they looking at? There's a huge Chinese company.
Yeah, Tencent.
I assume he's looking to that company, and I think they're incredibly dominant too.
Well, they've looked at Tencent, like the Chinese companies. I mean, those came on the radar in probably about 2006. So Facebook has sort of closely tracked what all of those Chinese companies. There's Tencent. There's a South Korean company.
Yeah, Line. Those guys who make Line. Yeah.
It might have been even before that, but Facebook has always looked at those markets and looked at those products and tracked very closely what they're doing.
Interesting.
They've always been very aware, because I think the monetization, especially like in virtual goods, was off the scale for those guys.
Yeah, well, that's where the name 10 cent comes from. It's a bunch of things you can buy for 10 cents. And actually, where that came from is in China they had to have one-child policy. You can only have one child.
Yep.
So that means every child has 2 parents and 4 grandparents.
Right.
Funneling them like kind of pocket money.
Right.
So you get this huge populations of people with a little bit of money to spend. And so these companies
they sliced and diced it really well.
It's designed to just extract that cash from little kids.
But Facebook has been tracking those companies for a long time and sort of looked at sort of inspirational features. I think when you look at WhatsApp, you have moved a sort of business model from a sort of web display advertising to a sort of carrier-based billing model.
Right.
And I think that gives you a lot of strategic options in terms of a very diverse set of businesses. Like when you pair that with Facebook sort of sponsoring free internet access for people who use the app in third world, now you're starting.
Facebook just announced a payments thing right after.
Yeah, the payments thing. Yeah, that
so
was
that's really,
earlier this week.
So that's just 2 chess moves that Mark Zuckerberg made.
Yeah, that's going to be, I bet you that's an integrated WhatsApp feature as that platform gets built out a little bit more.
Yeah.
And
so Oculus Rift, it's
super exciting.
It's a virtual reality
for
thing.
Games, yeah.
Okay, so this is the first one where I went.
So you've got Oculus Rift, which I think it started like 2 years ago, which was this hardware hacking project to build a VR headset.
Okay.
VR dead as a doornail. Like you look at VR. I mean, nobody would think to invest in. Started as a Kickstarter project, but when you look at the background of the guys who sort of built that project, in terms of what they were doing, and in terms of the sort of data points they were using to sort of build that, where they're trying to get over this valley of motion blur and getting sick in terms of head movement, to their latest prototype where they basically had to buy Samsung phones to take apart the screens and hack those screens into their headsets.
Okay, yeah, right.
To build these development kits that they're giving to these game developers. You start to say, okay, well, technology is a VR. This is pretty cool. So there's potential for a platform there. But I think that when you sort of get this sort of ability to build this product with the depth of that team, and we're talking about like heavyweights here, like hardcore heavyweights, like the guy who invented first-person shooters. He is on on that Oculus team. Like he's their chief technology officer. Right. The guy who developed graphics for Windows, like Michael Abrash.
So what?
But I think that when you start to put those pieces together, and when you look at Facebook, where they have tried to develop a phone, they've taken 2 internal at-bats at trying to build a phone. They've taken 1 external at-bat at trying to build a phone with not great results.
Right.
So now you're talking about marrying software with hardware.
Yeah.
You've just bought the hottest team, arguably on the planet, outside of Apple and Samsung, and that is now your internal hardware team. So
it's not a Google Glass play. It's a Facebook phone play. Possibly. I mean, who knows? Who knows? I mean, I wouldn't. If I were Facebook, I certainly would not show those cards. Right.
But as somebody who worked there early on, or as somebody sort of familiar with thinking, I'd say like the thinking is like we now have the hottest hardware team in the world. So if like hardware or building this ecosystem or this internet org piece or whatever these complete pieces to build these ecosystems are to enable the company mission, we now have that in-house, and it only cost us $2 billion.
Right.
I mean, Google spent $12 billion for patents from Motorola.
Right. That's just crazy. So if Facebook built a phone, they'd build an OS. Or they wouldn't just use an Android thing, would they?
No, they would do their own.
So it would be like Android, iOS, and
it would be
FBOS.
FBOS.
Crap! Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know who knows what they'd call it, but at this point, they have a hardware platform basis.
Wow.
Which is in the Oculus Rift.
So it sounds like Mark Zuckerberg's just a chess master.
Like
we're all just watching.
There is a long play here, which I think people have just totally missed.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been cool talking to you. Thanks a lot for spending the time.
Yeah. No problem. I mean, I can talk about this for hours.
Yeah,
this is the stuff I love.
All right. I'm Kent Lindstrom. This has been the Something Venture podcast. Thanks for listening.
And I'm Nick Heyman. Thanks for listening.